Story 1. The Missing Student. It was a regular Wednesday when the principal's voice suddenly crackled through the intercom. Attention students and staff. This is a lockdown. I repeat, we are in lockdown. Please remain calm and stay where you are. At first, no one moved. We'd had drills before and everyone assumed this was just another practice. But there was something strange about the way the principal's voice sounded. It wasn't the usual calm tone. Instead, it was strained, almost shaky. My history teacher, Miss Caldwell, seemed tense too. She rushed to lock the door, her face pale as she turned off the lights and motioned for us to move to the back of the room. "Get away from the windows and be quiet," she whispered. That's when I realized something was wrong. This wasn't a drill. I huddled with my classmates in the far corner of the room trying to slow my breathing, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The room was eerily quiet, with only the faint sound of rustling as someone shifted or breathed too loudly. Then came the footsteps. At first, they were faint, but they quickly grew louder as they approached the hallway outside our room. They didn't sound like the usual hurried footsteps of teachers or students. These were slow, deliberate, almost predatory. The sound echoed through the halls, making the silence even more unbearable. My palms started sweating and I pressed my back harder against the wall, as if I could disappear into it. I glanced over at my friend Sarah, who was sitting right beside me just minutes earlier. But she wasn't there anymore. My heart sank. She had been right there. Where had she gone? I scanned the room, hoping she had just shifted to a different spot, but her place was empty. Panic surged inside me. How had she disappeared without anyone noticing? I whispered to the kid next to me, "Have you seen Sarah?" He shook his head, looking just as confused as I was. I caught Miss Caldwell's eye, and I could see she had noticed too. She crawled toward the door, slowly rising up to peek through the small glass window. Her eyes widened for a brief second before she ducked back down. "She's gone," Miss Caldwell whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could ask what she meant, we all heard a soft scratching at the door. My blood ran cold. The door handle jiggled slightly as if someone was trying to open it. Everyone froze, not even daring to breathe. Whoever it was, they were right outside. The handle stopped moving. For a moment, it was completely silent. Then we heard it, a soft, muffled voice. It was faint but unmistakable. "Help me." It was Sarah's voice. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I wanted to jump up to open the door, but something inside me screamed not to move. Miss Caldwell shook her head violently at me, silently mouthing, "Don't." The voice came again, louder this time. "Please help me. I'm stuck." It was definitely Sarah, but something was wrong. The tone was off. The desperation in her voice felt forced, almost robotic. And then I realized something terrifying. It was coming from directly behind the door, but Sarah couldn't have left the classroom without us seeing her. Miss Caldwell edged closer to the window again, her face pale with fear. She whispered, "Stay absolutely still." The voice outside the door kept calling for help, but now it sounded distorted, almost like someone was mimicking Sarah. "Please, open the door," the voice repeated, but it no longer sounded human. Suddenly, the footsteps returned, louder and faster this time, as if someone was running through the halls. We all flinched at the sound, but the voice outside our door didn't stop. It kept pleading, kept scratching. Then, without warning, the noise stopped altogether. Everything went dead silent again, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Minutes passed. No one moved. My pulse was still racing, but slowly the terror in the room started to ease. Maybe whatever was out there had gone. Just when we thought it was safe, the intercom crackled back to life. "Lockdown is over," the principal's voice echoed through the speakers. "Please carry on with your day as normal." We waited for Miss Caldwell to give the all-clear. She moved cautiously toward the door, peeking through the window one last time before unlocking it. We all stood up shakily, relieved to get out of the tense darkness. As we filed out into the hallway, I couldn't help but glance around, expecting to see Sarah, or at least someone who knew where she'd gone. But the halls were empty, eerily quiet. I went to her locker, hoping she might have just wandered off or was playing some kind of sick joke. But Sarah never came back. The school went into a frenzy. The police were called. They searched the entire building, every classroom, every hallway, but there was no trace of Sarah. She had vanished. Her parents were interviewed, the authorities questioned us all, but no one had seen anything. And then came the twist. A few days later, I overheard some teachers talking in hushed voices near the office. One of them mentioned checking the security cameras from that day. "We saw Sarah on the footage," one of them whispered. "She walked down the hallway right before the lockdown started." But what?" the other teacher asked, sounding just as nervous as I felt listening in. She wasn't alone. Chills raced down my spine. I moved closer to hear the rest. There was someone walking with her, the first teacher continued. But their face, it was all wrong. Distorted. And when we slowed down the footage, Sarah's eyes, they weren't right either. I backed away, my heart racing. Sarah didn't just disappear. Something, or someone, took her. And whatever it was, it wasn't human. Sarah was never found, and no one dared to talk about that day again. But I'll never forget the way her voice sounded outside the door, the way it begged for help, even though deep down I knew it wasn't really her. And I'll never forget the last thing I heard before I left the school that day. Come back. I'm still waiting for you. Story 2. The Stranger in the Hallway. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when the intercom crackled to life. This is not a drill, the principal's voice echoed through the school, tense and urgent. I repeat, this is not a drill. We are in lockdown. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, and remain silent. My stomach twisted. The word "not a drill" made it clear. Something was wrong, very wrong. Our teacher, Mr. Harris, didn't waste a second. He sprinted to the door, locking it with trembling hands before turning off the lights. Everyone get down. Move to the corner and stay quiet, he whispered, his usual calm demeanor completely gone. The panic in his voice made the tension in the room skyrocket. We huddled together at the back of the classroom, hearts pounding in the suffocating darkness. No one dared to speak. You could feel the fear creeping through the air, thick and suffocating. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. Minutes crawled by in dead silence. I could hear my classmates shifting nervously, trying to stay still and calm. But then, just as we started to relax a bit, we heard something that made every muscle in my body tense up. Footsteps. They weren't the quick, hurried steps of a teacher checking on the situation. These footsteps were slow, almost methodical, like someone was taking their time walking through the halls. The sound echoed louder and louder, the footsteps moving closer to our classroom. I held my breath, every nerve in my body on edge. The steps stopped right outside our door. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but silence. My eyes were glued to the small window in the classroom door, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. Who was out there? Why had they stopped? Were they watching us? Then the door handle moved. It jiggled, slowly at first, then harder, like someone was testing the lock. A few kids whimpered softly, and Mr. Harris shot them a sharp look, mouthing, "Be quiet." I was gripping my friend Jenny's hand so tightly I thought I'd break it. The handle rattled again, more forcefully this time. My heart was in my throat. Suddenly the rattling stopped. I could barely hear anything over the blood rushing in my ears, but the footsteps, they didn't move away. Whoever was outside was still there, standing silently. I could feel it, the presence of something just beyond the door. That's when it happened. The lights flickered. It was so brief, just a quick flash, but in that moment I saw it. A shadow. A figure standing right outside the small glass window, its face pressed against the glass. But something was off. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost like it was too tall to fit the window properly. And its eyes, or at least what I thought were eyes, were too dark, too hollow. They didn't reflect any light. I gasped, clamping my hand over my mouth before I could make any noise. My mind was racing. What had I just seen? No one else seemed to notice. They were all still too focused on the door. After a long pause, the footsteps slowly moved away, fading down the hall. Relief washed over me, but I couldn't shake the image of that figure, of those eyes. When the footsteps finally disappeared, we thought it was over. But as we all sat there waiting for the lockdown to end, I noticed something disturbing. The clock on the wall had stopped. I nudged Jenny, pointing to it. Her eyes widened when she saw it. The second hand was frozen, stuck at 12. No one else seemed to notice, but my heart started racing again. What was happening? Had time stopped, or was this some kind of glitch? I tried to calm myself, but the tension in the room was unbearable. Then, without warning, the intercom buzzed again. "Lockdown is over," the principal said, his voice shaky. "Students may return to their regular schedule." Everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief, but something still didn't feel right. Mr. Harris hesitated for a moment before getting up to unlock the door. "Stay together," he whispered as we filed out into the hallway. I expected to see other students, teachers, or maybe even police officers in the halls, but they were completely empty. No one was rushing out of classrooms. There was no chatter, no relief. The hallway stretched out, eerily silent. "Where is everyone?" Jenny whispered, fear creeping back into her voice. I didn't have an answer. Mr. Harris led us down the hall, his eyes darting nervously in every direction. As we passed the other classrooms, I noticed something unsettling. Every door was still locked, every light off. It was as if the entire school was frozen in time. And then I heard it. Footsteps. The same slow, deliberate footsteps from before. But this time they weren't in the hall. They were behind us. I whipped around, expecting to see someone, anyone, but there was nothing. Just the long, empty hallway stretching out into the distance. Yet the footsteps were there, getting louder and closer. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Jenny. She nodded, her face pale with fear. Mr. Harris stopped suddenly, turning to face us. "Back to the classroom now," he hissed, his voice barely controlled. We bolted back down the hall, throwing ourselves into the classroom as Mr. Harris slammed the door shut and locked it again. The footsteps stopped, but now we were trapped. Trapped with whatever was out there. The clock was still frozen. My heart raced as we sat in the dark once again, waiting for something to happen. I kept glancing at the door, expecting it to burst open at any moment. Then came the voice. A low, whispering sound, almost like a hiss. "Let me in," it said in a voice that was barely human. "I'm right outside, let me in." The voice was faint but unmistakable. It wasn't the principal or anyone I recognized. It was something else. Something that didn't belong in our school. I could feel it watching us, waiting. Mr. Harris was pale, his hands shaking as he motioned for us to stay quiet. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, like whatever was outside was getting frustrated. "Let me in," it repeated, the voice now guttural and distorted. Just as the panic reached its peak, the intercom crackled again. "Students and staff, please disregard the previous announcement. The lockdown is still in effect." The voice outside the door stopped. The clock on the wall started ticking again. But I knew deep down that something had changed. Whoever, or whatever, had been in the hall wasn't gone. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance to get inside. The school never explained what really happened that day. They said it was a false alarm, that there was no real danger. But I know what I saw. And I'll never forget the whispering voice or the figure standing outside the door. I still hear those footsteps sometimes in the quiet moments when I'm alone. And I wonder, will it ever come back? Story 3. The Whisper in the Gym. It started like any other day. I was in gym class, half listening to the coach drone on about the importance of teamwork. The sound of bouncing basketballs and sneakers squeaking against the gym floor filled the air. Everything was normal, until the intercom crackled overhead. "This is not a drill," the principal's voice boomed, the usual calmness in his tone replaced by urgency. "We are in lockdown. I repeat, this is not a drill. Secure yourselves in place immediately." Everyone froze. A few kids giggled nervously, unsure if it was some kind of prank, but the coach's reaction told us otherwise. His face turned pale and he quickly ran to the double doors, pulling them shut and locking them with shaky hands. He turned off the lights and motioned for us to sit against the far wall. "Move now," he whispered harshly. I could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't like the drills we'd practiced before. Something was different this time, something far more serious. We huddled together in silence, the large gym suddenly feeling like a giant trap. The doors echoed every little sound, the faint creak of the metal hinges making my heart race faster. A few students whispered quietly, but a glare from the coach silenced them instantly. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was hours, it was hard to tell in the thick, suffocating darkness. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, though I couldn't see it from where I was sitting. I kept glancing toward the gym doors, half expecting someone or something to burst through at any moment. Suddenly, the faintest sound reached my ears. At first I thought I was imagining it, but it grew louder, unmistakable, a whisper. It was so soft, so faint, that I thought it might have been the wind slipping through the cracks in the old gym windows. But then the whisper became clearer. It was saying something. "Let me in." I glanced at my friend Kate sitting beside me. Her eyes were wide with fear and I knew she had heard it too. We exchanged nervous glances, but no one else seemed to notice. The gym was still dark, everyone silent, but that whispering, it was right outside the door. The coach stood near the entrance, keeping watch, but he hadn't reacted to the noise. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then it came again, louder this time. "Let me in, I need to get inside." It was a voice and it was closer now. I felt my skin crawl and I could see Kate gripping the edge of her sneakers, trying to stay calm. The voice was unlike anything I had ever heard before, soft yet menacing, familiar but wrong. It sounded like a student, but there was something distorted about it, like the words were being stretched or twisted in some unnatural way. I couldn't take it anymore. I leaned in close to Kate and whispered, "Do you hear that?" Her face was pale. "Yeah. What is it?" Before I could answer, the gym doors rattled. Not violently, but as if someone was gently pushing against them, testing to see if they were locked. The whisper came again, now right behind the door. "Let me in. I'm locked out." My heart was racing. The voice, it sounded so familiar, like someone I knew, but I couldn't place it. The coach didn't seem to notice. He was staring straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the darkened gym. And then, something horrible happened. A shadow moved beneath the doors. I froze. I could see it clearly now. A figure standing just outside, its outline visible through the small crack between the floor and the gym doors. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and it wasn't moving like a person should. The shadow seemed to stretch and twist, elongating in a way that made my stomach churn. "Please? I'm locked out," the voice pleaded, more desperate now. But it wasn't the kind of desperation that made you want to help. It was chilling, almost mocking. I knew deep in my gut that we couldn't open those doors. The coach must have heard it too, because he moved closer to the entrance, his hand hovering over the lock. For a split second I thought he was going to open it. Panic surged through me. "No," I whispered, too scared to speak any louder. But just as he reached the door, something strange happened. The lights in the gym flickered, just once but enough to make everyone jump. And in that brief moment when the lights came on, I saw it. The figure wasn't outside the doors anymore. It was inside. The shadow moved quickly, darting along the far wall of the gym, barely visible in the dim light. But it was there, watching us. My breath caught in my throat and I gripped Kate's arm, too terrified to move. "Did you see that?" I whispered, but she just nodded, her eyes wide with fear. The lights flickered again, plunging us back into darkness. The coach had stopped moving, standing completely still as the shadow crept closer, sliding along the gym floor. It moved in ways no person could, as if it was a part of the darkness itself. Suddenly, the whispering voice filled the air again, but this time, it wasn't just outside the door. It was coming from all around us. "Let me in." The voice echoed, surrounding us in the pitch-black gym. I'm already inside. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the presence, whatever it was, getting closer. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was everywhere, filling the gym with an eerie, unnatural sound. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the intercom crackled to life once again. "Lockdown is over," the principal announced, though his voice sounded strained. "Please return to your normal activities." The lights flickered back on and the whispering stopped. The shadow was gone. Everything seemed normal again. But I knew better. The coach unlocked the doors, motioning for us to leave. We all filed out, everyone in stunned silence. But as we walked down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. That's when I noticed it. The figure. It was standing at the end of the hallway just outside the gym, its head tilted in that strange, unnatural way. No one else seemed to notice, but I could feel its gaze locked on me. "Let me in," the voice whispered again, this time only in my head. I never went back to that gym. No one talked about the lockdown or the strange things we heard and saw. But every now and then, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I hear it. The whisper. "Let me in." And I know deep down that whatever it was, it's still out there waiting for me to let it in.